Well, good afternoon. I want to take time before we get started to recognize City Director B.J. Wyrick, who is joining us for today's public safety briefing. As I shared, we'll be hosting these public safety briefings to keep residents apprised of crime in our city and what we are doing to combat it. Again, as always, I want to share my appreciation to the men and women of Little Rock Police Department and all that they're doing to protect and serve our city. As I shared last week, this administration has taken a holistic approach in addressing the root and systemic causes, whether it be education, economics, etc., in addition to providing necessary resources to our police department that fight crime every day. Just as crime did not occur overnight, it won't be solved overnight. But addressing the root will change our city for generations to come, not just temporarily. Again, we want to focus not only on a short-term fix, but a long-term fix so that we can save generations here in our city. Since passing the public health emergency earlier this month, we went live and made some certain decisions. We talked last week a lot about the close to $2 million with our community violent intervention proposals, where we have already issued close to $2 million towards 10 organizations and what they're going to do to address systemic and root causes as it relates to our youth and our young adults to prevent them from a life of crime. We're very grateful for the Office of Neighborhood Safety that's led by Mr. Michael Sanders from that process, and so we want to say thank you to Mr. Michael Sanders as well as Dana Doucette, who is the leader. So we want to share that. But here's some other things we wanted to update the public on what we're doing in regards to community violence. We've also, from a jobs perspective, have already posted live on the City of Little Rock website. We have new job postings for our street intervention specialists. So we have a street team. Many people know for many, many years that we've had a team of street team members that are working to combat violence, prevent violence by understanding what's going on in various neighborhoods, what's going on within our city to prevent crime from happening, and very focused on a holistic approach from that standpoint. Those 5 members, I believe, somewhere around 5 to 6 members that are currently a part of that team, we are now hiring more street intervention specialists, which will give us more of an array, more of a perspective as we move forward. So we want to thank our existing street team specialists that are focused on that work, but also we want to encourage those who would like to join our street team, that we are paying for those jobs. These are utilizing city resources. I want to thank again members of the city board, City Director B.J. Wyrick, that it's voted for this so we can have the resources, so we can have more street intervention specialists. In addition to that, I think many people know that starting in 2020, the City of Little Rock and the Little Rock Police Department hired its first social worker to help the Little Rock Police Department to reduce the number of calls that they're responding to. They have more to do with mental and social well-being issues, things that the Little Rock Police Department should not have to respond to. And so we're grateful that we have started that process of building a team of mental health and social workers. Most recently, this past December, we won a U.S. Department of Justice $1 million grant to add more social workers, and now we'll be hiring additional social workers as it relates to ensuring that the men and women of Little Rock Police Department reduce the amount of not necessarily unnecessary calls, but calls that need to be more well-equipped with mental health and social workers. So we wanted to share that. We've also assigned attorneys in the city attorney's office to expeditiously negotiate and execute the contracts within the various community organizations that we passed last week and approved, and those that will be going before the board next week for more community assistance. Again, we'll be doing this rolling average of organizations that have the opportunity to receive resources to combat crime from a holistic, systemic, root cause perspective. But also we want to encourage other organizations to get involved. While we've been focusing on 11 to 24, we also know we have to focus on younger ages as well. And so we want organizations that are involved, whether it be youth sports, that we have resources, that we want to do whatever possible to ensure that our youth and our young adults are productive and they're not choosing a life of crime. They have something to do. And so that's the reason why we're focused on that from that particular effort. I also want to thank our city attorney, who's been working expeditiously to get these contracts approved and out the door so these organizations can get to work with the resources that we are providing them. Most recently, another update, a sweep occurred at Bradford Estates addressing our loitering issue by holding businesses accountable, starting with our top 10 locations with the most calls for service. Again, we know there are particular areas of the city where loitering happens, and shortly after the loitering happens, crime happens. And so we've been laser focused on how we address those businesses, those apartment complexes, those particular stores by addressing certain issues. We know we were able to address, and I'm sure Mr. Jamie Collins, our Director of Planning, as well as Chief Hubbard, our Chief of our Fire Department, we were able to handle some issues at the community market on Battery. But also, most recently this week, we're able to handle some issues with Bradford Estates. And so I'll ask Mr. Jamie Collins, Chief Hubbard, come before us, just give us a brief update there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On Wednesday, February 16th, a team comprised of code enforcement officers for planning and development and housing and neighborhood programs, along with the fire department and the police department, visited Bradford Estates. We found over 100 violations at the property and is currently working with the property owner to remedy those violations. We send out a detailed report with all the department's findings and a compliance date to make those corrections. And we will follow up to ensure compliance with Bradford Estates. Thank you.
Good morning. Chief Hubbard, Little Rock Fire Department. An update on the loitering that the mayor referenced earlier. We identified 10 businesses, locations throughout the city that had the largest call volume of complaints in regards to loitering at their businesses. A notice was drafted rather, informing those businesses of the expectations in regards to the recent ordinance that was passed by our members of the board of directors. All of the businesses were receptive to the expectations when visited by fire marshals of the Little Rock Fire Department and code enforcement personnel from planning. It was a success in that all of the business owners were receptive to the initiative. They were put on notice if there were any violations, the consequences that possibly could follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Collins and Chief Hubbard, for that update on the sweeps that we are making as it relates to loitering issues that create and foster crime in the long term. Also, we will be announcing members of the HOPE Council. If you remember last week, HOPE stands for Holistic Outreach Prevention in each neighborhood very soon, comprised of relevant stakeholders from the community and partner agencies to address crime through community programs, law enforcement, and even other branches of government, as well as our victims community as well. We will continue hosting our listening sessions throughout the community. Most recent this past weekend, we had a very good, courageous conversation meeting that was led by the Little Rock Police Department as well as Second Baptist Church on John Barrow. We had close to 100 community members who shared feedback, their thoughts on crime in the city and what we all are doing to combat that. It definitely was a really meaningful meeting. We're grateful for the feedback, and as we continue to work together as a community. Again, it's more than just law enforcement. We will continue our proactive policing, which Assistant Chief Bewley, who's over our investigative division, will share an investigative update. We will continue proactive policing, continue targeted increased patrols and presence in areas that need to see that presence to ensure that we are reducing crime. But also, in addition to proactive policing, precision policing, it has to be a holistic approach where we focus on prevention, intervention, and treatment to ensure that we are saving a generation of youth and young adults that are committing many of these crimes. With that being stated, I also want to share the progress that we are making on a number of different efforts as it relates to investigations. The leader of our investigations division is Assistant Chief Wayne Bewley, who continues to do a phenomenal job of his years of service here in the city of Little Rock. He'll give us an update shortly. Chief Bewley.
Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor stated, I am Wayne Bewley, Assistant Chief of Police over our Investigative Bureau. That bureau consists of our Major Crimes Division, our Special Investigations Division, and our 21st Century Policing Division. My purpose here today is to talk about the violent crime that we've seen in the city, particularly the homicides, The numbers will reflect that from January 1st of 2022 through February 21st, 2022, this year versus those same dates in 2021, our violent crime is up a little over 35%. Particularly homicide in that same period of time is up 42.86%. I am pleased to say that we have not had a homicide since our last press meeting last week. Our current numbers, we are at 10 homicides compared to 7 at the same time last year. And out of those 10, we've made arrests in 6, which puts us at a clearance rate of 60%. The national average is around 64%. Additionally, we've submitted an additional homicide, which Attorney's Office to determine if criminal charges are appropriate in this case. We have identified all parties involved. I do want to take a moment and particularly highlight the 3 remaining that we have open at this point. And I would like to encourage anyone in the city of Little Rock or anywhere that has any information related to these 3 homicides that I want to highlight to reach out to us at 371-INFO, and that's 371-4636. The first one occurred on January the 8th, 2022 at 1200 Florida, which is Meriwether Park. The victim in this particular homicide was Jaden Shackelford. The second one that I want to highlight occurred on January 28th, 2022 at University and I-630. Bradford Bankson was the victim in this homicide. And then the last one occurred on February 4th, 2022 at 2223 South Harrison Street, and Lawrence Parker was the victim in this homicide. Again, out of the 10 this year, these are the 3 that we have still open and are under ongoing investigations, very active investigations. And we encourage anyone that has any information to please reach out to us at 371-4636 with that information. The Investigative Bureau continues to work closely with the other bureaus within our department, both executive and operations. We are sharing information often on a daily basis, definitely on a weekly basis through our intel crime briefings that occur every Monday outlining the weekend's events. We continue to do ComStat, which everyone's familiar with, that gives us the trends and the numbers and allows us the opportunity to know where to deploy our resources and our hotspots. We continue to partner with our local, state, and federal partners. And I want to, at this point, acknowledge publicly we appreciate that relationship that we have and recognize the impact that it has on our efforts to work towards reducing the violent crime that we're seeing. I would also like to publicly today say I appreciate the men and women of the Little Rock Police Department, the work and effort that they put in every day. It should be commended, and I appreciate that effort. Lastly, I'll just finish up with saying, unfortunately today, both Chief Humphrey and Chief Haskins, Assistant Chief Haskins, are occupied with other appointments. And so from an operational standpoint, I will be here and be available for any questions related to that or any of the investigative updates that I highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Bewley. Just again, want to share how keenly aware of what's happening in our city, but we understand that we have to have an all-hands-on-deck approach, and that's the reason why we've been doing even more. And again, we share our praise and our appreciation to the men and women of Little Rock Police Department. We're grateful for their efforts. We understand that we continue to move forward as it relates to proactive policing, but also what we're doing for prevention, intervention, and treatment. And again, it's an all-hands-on-deck approach. We ask that the community gets involved. We're grateful for what we've been seeing as we relates to our community town hall meetings as well, as we're rallying voices, rallying community leaders to ensure that we're doing all that we can to prevent our youth and our young adults from living and or committing a life of crime. And so with that being said, we'll open the floor for questions.
What kind of responses were you getting from the public at that public meeting on what suggestions were that they had to help decrease the crime in the city?
Sure. One of the great things, and I was able, I want to take the time to appreciate the Little Rock Police Department for reaching out to the community, really being engaged. That's an example of community policing by having those type of courageous conversations in a very trusting environment where everyone's able to share exactly how they feel, express concern, express praise, express areas for opportunities for improvement. One of the things that we heard is that they are grateful for the work that we're doing as it relates to prevention, intervention, and treatment. They want to see more as it relates to those particular types of organizations to really change the paradigm as it relates to our youth and our young adults. So that was number one, that they are very supportive of this effort. But in that same vein, as we've been focusing on 11 to 24, a great example is Coach Ed Johnson of the Sunset Tigers. He's definitely shared with me and many others that while we're focused on 11 to 24, we also need to focus on those are between 2 and 10 to ensure that they never even get to that point of that decision-making process. You know, I can tell you that, you know, without many different things that relates to sports and different programs like we're fostering right now, I could be one of those individuals right now. And so when we think through that, that really has a lasting effect on all of us. So that's one of the things that we shared. Also, what was shared is that we got to continue to focus on the victims and the victims' families. So many times, you know, we see it run across the news, what's happened, then we forget. We can never forget, you know, those 64 families last year, the 10 families right now. I make it a point to, as best as possible, to reach out to different family members when things happen. And I can tell you, families are hurting. This past weekend, I was with Mr. Parker's family. Families are hurting. They also are encouraging everyone, when you see something, say something so we can prevent this crime.
Is this also a money issue? Does the city need to come up with some new sources of money to help achieve what you're trying to achieve?
First, again, the question was about, is this a money issue? I would say no. And the reason why it's not a money issue is because the members of the City of Little Rock Board of Directors, at every point, we ensure that we give the men and women of Little Rock Police Department what they need. They are a well-resourced organization. We can always give more as it needs, and so we've been able to do that with the men and women of the Little Rock City Board of Directors approving budgets. Also, they recently approved the $2 million as it relates to the community violence intervention proposals, and they also approved the ability to hire the street intervention specialists as well as the social workers. So we definitely don't have a money issue. Now, again, if we ever do, we'll figure that out because public safety is our top priority.
Have you determined what are the root causes that y'all need to spearhead and hit head on and figure out how we can lower this crime rate?
Yes, the question is regarding what are the root causes. Many times the root causes has a lot to do with access to jobs. We got to really understand that, just to keep it plain, that Little Rock generally, we understand that many times we have individuals that are entering our society that are not able to access jobs. And so we have to do a better job of ensuring that we have better access to jobs as we move forward. That's the reason why we're funding a day labor program, because we understand certain individuals, just because of their past, may not be able to receive a living wage somewhere else. And so when you have an entrepreneur that can handle some of those issues and become a little bit more lenient than another business may be, you're able to keep someone focused, someone that has a job so they can pay the bills, take care of the family, and not resort to a life of crime. So we understand that we have to continue to focus on jobs. While we're creating jobs, we have historic jobs growth, but we have to understand our brothers and sisters that are re-entering society with a past that sometimes prevent them from a living wage. And so that's one of the reasons why we're focused on the day labor program.
Family problems. Is that a problem with crime? One time, sometimes it'll be a one-family household. It could be a father or a mother. Do we find not being able to supervise all the time, like if a mom stayed home or a dad stayed home, they're always supervising and staying on? Have y'all found that to be an issue?
Well, we understand when you look at, particularly from the homicide standpoint, Chief Bewley could share with you, looking at the numbers and the demographics, is we understand not only is it a youth and young adult issue, it's also a domestic violence issue. So clearly there are some issues as it relates to, because many of the individuals that are committing the homicides actually know the person they're committed it to. So we always have to continue to do a better job, focus on how we uplift the community together. Next question.
You could answer this, or maybe Chief Bewley could answer this, but I don't think he was at the town hall on Saturday, so he may not be best equipped. What do you make of the public perception of the police department that was shared during the survey and during the questions at that town hall? How do you think people are feeling about the police department, and was steps can be made to improve that opinion of community policing and how officers care? I think so. Those were some of the questions asked.
If you can share, I don't readily recall that survey number. Do you recall?
Yeah, I think it showed up as well. So I think
What I can share is that from a community policing standpoint, the men and women of Little Rock Police Department are committed to community policing. That's the reason why they have a 21st Century Community Policing Division. And again, we want to always focus on how we can always do better. And so that's the reason why we have spearheaded a number of different organizations, whether it be the Citizens Police Review Board, to ensure there's greater feedback from that particular standpoint, as well as our Community Policing Division.
Businesses that are problems loitering, what are the consequences that they can face if the problem doesn't get better, and sort of what's the threshold for that?
Well, look, I'll ask Mr. Jamie Collins on some of the aspects of the, I guess what you shared was basically what are the consequences. Clearly we have fines. I believe there were $1,000 fines, some of them.
Yes, since this is an ordinance that was passed for the board, what we do is we notify the property owner, or the business operation of the need to comply with that loitering ordinance that was passed. And then we work with them to try to come up with a way to do that. And if it is a continual thing, eventually we would have to provide a citation for that, and it would go to environmental court. And the fines would be up to whatever it is per the ordinance, I believe, which is $500 per day per occurrence. That is the maximum, but the attending judge could reduce that.
I was wondering, you said you're doing like weekly sweeps. Is it like if it doesn't get better in 1 week, you might start thinking about a citation, or is it like what's the—
Well, that is like I said, when we talked about it, Chief Hubbard mentioned that it was a team. It was the police, fire, and planning and zoning. And then what we do is we work with all of them. When the police comes up with a location that has just been a lot of loitering going on over time, we go investigate, we give them the letter, and then that is a monitoring program, whether police is out there doing their daily trips, or the fire department is going out on calls, or even our code enforcement officers. When we drive around the city, whenever we see that happening, we inform the team, and the team gets together and makes a decision on what we're going to do and proceed. Thank you.
And again, due to that great work, there have been different organizations that have ceased operations because of what we've been able to find. And so many times when you find loitering, you may find some other issues. And so our planning department, as well as the men and women of both our police and fire, have been able to shut some of those businesses down. And so that's one of the things, until they can get things in order and understand that they're part of this community, and we don't want them contributing to crime. Last question.
When it comes to reporting on homicides and getting information to the public, I understand that you don't want to release anything sensitive to a suspect getting away, but at least we with the press have asked a lot of questions about relationships of suspects to victims, at least as best you can tell. Sometimes after that suspect has already been arrested, information about the type of firearms used and if that firearm has been taken off the street after the incident. And we can't get answers to these questions sometimes at all, but often it doesn't come until well after the initial incident. You have people concerned about, is this person out there on the run, maybe willing to shoot someone else to avoid capture? I know some of these are isolated incidents, but some of them may not be. What can we expect as far as transparency with knowing about these things, that the public knows who's out on the street and what type of weapons they have?
Sure, a very complicated question, as you would expect, and there are reasons at times that we do not release a lot of the information, particularly when things are ongoing. We have to be able to protect certain things that keeps the integrity of the investigation, so when we do apprehend a suspect and do interviews, the known information is specific to us as the investigators and those that we're interviewing, and not widely known out into the public. From the 10 that we've had this year, as you see, we have arrested in 6 In one, we actually have identified all parties that are involved and have it currently at the prosecuting attorney's office to determine charges, which is not an uncommon practice. We have 3 that remain open, and out of those 3, we are relatively comfortable that we have an idea these are acquaintance related to some level. It's not just a random person that's out there. And any of the homicides, as far as the weapons and some of the other questions, I don't have all of those intimate details to be able to tell you. But even when the arrest is made, there is a certain amount that we still have to be somewhat careful about, because we still have to work through the Pulaski County Prosecuting Attorney's Office to successfully prosecute these cases. And there are things that are concerning from potential jury pools and that kind of stuff. So we will continue to strive to be as transparent as possible in anything that we feel is going to be a continuing possible threat to the community. We're gonna get that information out there.
Thank you so much, everyone. We do appreciate you, and again, we'll continue our weekly public safety briefings as it relates to communicate how we are addressing and curbing violent crime here in the state's capital city. And again, we're keenly aware that there's been an uptick, but the men and women of the Little Rock Police Department, again, should all be commended for the work that they're doing to capture individuals when they commit crime. And again, we want to ensure that we are continuing to focus on a duality approach of proactive policing, but also focus on prevention, intervention, and treatment, and addressing how we can save a generation. Thank you so much. Have a great day.